All right, let's dive into property development due diligence today. If you've ever thought about, getting into property development, or even if you're just curious about what it takes to, turn a piece of land into something bigger and better, this is the deep dive for you. We've got an expert with us today who uses a really detailed 26-point checklist to really vet property development opportunities, the kind of insider tips that, help developers like Amber Khanna, who we're going to be referencing today, to avoid those costly mistakes that can really set you back. And trust me, some of the things on this checklist are surprising, stuff you wouldn't even think about, like soil
Yep.
or the strange ways that noise can impact a project.
Yeah, it's all about going deeper than just the surface, looking for those hidden factors that can really make or break a development.
Okay, so before we get into this checklist, let's just take a step back for a second.
Come on.
What is property development due diligence?
It's, well, it's more than just ticking those legal boxes, right? It's about understanding the true potential of a property, but also the potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
We're talking risks, rewards, the whole 9 yards. And today we're going to turn that knowledge into action.
Okay, so we're not just armchair developers here. We're going to be able to actually use this information. And speaking of the real world, Australia has a ton of property opportunities, right?
Absolutely.
But with that comes a lot of information to sift through.
Yeah, that's right. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Easy to get stuck in that analysis paralysis.
Right.
That's where a system like a due diligence checklist really helps. Like the 26-point checklist we're going to discuss today, it helps you quickly sort through the bad opportunities so you can focus your energy on the good ones.
It's like a secret weapon, right? Okay, let's break this down. Where do we start?
First, we need to focus on the location. It seems obvious, but there's more to it than you might think. Let's start with public transport. Obviously, you want to be close to it, but you also need to think bigger. Savvy developers are looking ahead, not just what exists now, but what's planned for the future.
So you're not just thinking about getting on the bus today. You're thinking about maybe the train line that's coming in 5 years. I like that forward thinking. Okay, what else is important when it comes to location?
Well, schools and education facilities. That's a big one, especially for families. Being near good schools can make a big difference for buyers.
Yeah, it adds value to the project. Okay, location, location, location. How about access to shopping and other amenities?
Definitely. But it's more than just having a supermarket nearby. You want to think about places of worship, hospitals, parks, recreational facilities, all those things that contribute to a good lifestyle.
Right, you're thinking about the needs of the people who are going to be living there. Okay, we've looked at the neighborhood. Now let's get down to the nitty-gritty of the site itself.
Okay, so first up, the total area of the land versus the usable area. You might see a big plot of land and think, jackpot. But you need to consider things like setbacks and easements. Those can limit how much you can actually build.
Ah, so you might not be able to use all of the land.
That's right, and a few square meters can make a big difference, especially if you're building something like townhouses.
So it's not just about size, it's about what you can do with it. What about the topography of the land? Does that matter?
Absolutely. The ideal site is flat with just a slight slope for drainage. Sloping sites can mean a lot of extra work and expense, things like retaining walls.
So a flat site is going to be easier and cheaper to build on.
In most cases, yes. And here's a tip. A site that slopes towards the street is usually better for access and construction.
Interesting, I wouldn't have thought of that. Okay, what about trees and vegetation? Are those good or bad for a development?
They can be both. Mature trees add value to a property, but they can also be a challenge. You might have to pay to protect certain trees or even remove them, depending on local council regulations.
So those trees can be beautiful, but they can also be a headache.
Sometimes, yeah. And you also need to be aware of things like the vegetation protection overlay. That can really limit what you can do with the land.
Right, so we need to make sure we're following the rules, even when it comes to nature. Okay, we've looked at the surface. What about what's underneath? How important is the soil?
Soil is crucial, especially for larger projects. You need to know the soil-bearing capacity. Can it support the weight of what you want to build?
So we need to know what we're building on.
Exactly. And be wary of fill-in ground. That's land that's been filled with soil from somewhere else. It can be unstable.
Okay, so a soil test is a must-do.
Think of it as an investment.
Right, it could save you a lot of trouble later on. Okay, we've covered location and the site itself. What's next on our checklist?
Now we need to zoom out a bit and look at the neighborhood as a whole.
Okay, so the bigger picture.
Yes, because a property doesn't exist in a vacuum. The surrounding area can have a big impact on your development.
What are some of the key things we should be looking at?
Well, first impressions matter. Is the neighborhood well maintained? Does it have that, sense of community?
A nice streetscape can add value.
Absolutely. On the other hand, a rundown neighborhood can drag down your property values.
What about practical things like stormwater drainage?
That's important too. You want to make sure water flows away from the property. Poor drainage can lead to all sorts of problems.
Expensive repairs.
Yeah, and unhappy residents. And of course, you want to avoid areas that are prone to flooding.
So check those flood zone maps.
Definitely.
Okay, what about traffic?
Traffic flow is a big one. Not just for the residents, but also for construction.
Right, think about getting materials in and out.
Exactly. And you also need to consider access for emergency vehicles.
So you're thinking about the entire life cycle of the project.
That's right.
Okay, how about noise? Is that something we need to consider?
Absolutely. You have the obvious things like busy roads and industrial areas, but there are also less obvious sources of noise.
Like what?
Parks, playgrounds, even recreational facilities.
I wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah, they can generate a lot of noise at certain times.
So you need to understand the rhythm of the neighborhood.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, what about essential services?
Water, electricity, gas, those are all givens. But these days, internet access is also essential.
Especially for larger developments.
Exactly.
People need to be connected.
And don't forget about waste disposal. It might seem mundane, but it's important. Especially for new developments, you need to know the local council's policies.
So things like garbage collection, recycling, green waste.
All of that.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground already. This due diligence checklist is really thorough. What's next?
Now we're going to dive into a crucial document here in Australia, the vendor statement, also known as Section 32.
Okay, let's unlock the secrets of the vendor statement.
So this vendor statement, it's mandatory here in Australia. Sellers have to give it to potential buyers. And it's packed with information about the property. Really important stuff you don't want to miss.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Why is this vendor statement so important for developers specifically? It sounds like it's important for anyone buying property.
Well, it's got all these details that can impact a development. Things you really need to know before you even think about making an offer. It's more than just buying a house,
Yeah.
It's about understanding what you can actually do with the land.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this is a big deal. What are some of the key things developers should be looking for?
Right away, it tells you about the subject matter of the sale. Basically, what are you actually buying? Is it vacant land, land with buildings on it, that kind of thing?
So it's about making sure you're getting what you paid for.
Exactly. And it also goes into boundary lines and potential encroachments, like where a structure from a neighboring property might be overlapping your land.
So no surprises there.
No surprises. And then you want to look at the land title. There are different types, and they each have different rules about what you can do with the property.
Got it. So we need to know what kind of title we're dealing with. What else?
Don't skip over the notations on the title. These can include easements, covenants, leases, restrictions.
Okay, easements and covenants. What are those, and why should developers care?
An easement gives someone else the right to use part of your land for a specific purpose, like utility lines or a driveway. A covenant is a restriction on how you can use the land, like limits on building height or the type of materials you can use.
So these could really impact our plans.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They can limit what you can build or how you can use the land.
Okay, so we're checking boundaries, titles, easements, covenants. What else is hiding in this vendor statement?
Well, make sure to verify ownership.
Mm.
The vendor statement should clearly state who the legal owner is, and it'll show any mortgages or other financial claims on the property.
We don't want any surprises there either.
No, you really don't.
Yeah.
And then there's a section on statutory authorities.
Statutory authorities.
Yeah, basically government agencies and local councils. This section tells you if they have any interest in the land, which could affect your development plans.
So we might find out the council has plans to widen the road, or that there are environmental restrictions.
Exactly. That kind of information is really valuable. It helps you avoid problems down the road.
Okay, so we're not just looking at the property itself, we're looking at its whole context.
That's right. And then there are disclosures about building works.
Building work disclosures. Tell me more.
So sellers have to disclose any building work done in recent years, usually 6 years or 7 if it was owner built.
So renovations, extensions, repairs.
All of that. It gives you a history of the property's construction.
We're peeling back the layers.
Exactly. This section also details any insurance or guarantees for those works and any easements or covenants related to them.
So it's about transparency.
Yes, making sure you know about any hidden issues.
Okay, what else does this document tell us?
It covers planning, road access, any fees or charges associated with the property, things like property taxes, and there's a warning notice advising the buyer to do their own research on the permitted use of the land.
So even with all this information, we still need to do our own due diligence.
Absolutely. The vendor statement is a great starting point, but it's just that, a
Yeah.
starting point.
Okay, what about utilities and services?
You'll find information about gas, electricity, water, sewerage, telephone connections. It's about making sure those services are in place.
Right, so we're checking all the essential utilities. What about proof of ownership?
The vendor statement usually includes a copy of the certificate of title or the chain of title documents. That's proof of ownership. And it outlines any mortgages or legal claims on the property.
Sounds important.
It is. And finally, if the property is part of an owner's corporation, you get a certificate with the fees, insurance details, and any legal matters.
Owners corporations, so that's like for apartments or townhouses.
Right, where there's shared property.
Okay, this vendor statement is like a property decoder ring?
It really is. Developers need to study it carefully.
So much valuable information.
It can help you make informed decisions.
All right, I'm convinced the vendor statement is essential. But we've still got more to cover on that 26-point checklist.
We do. We've looked at the location, the site, the neighborhood, the legal stuff. But now we need to assess the development potential itself.
Okay, let's talk development potential. Okay, let's talk about development potential. We've looked at the location, the site, the neighborhood, even all the legal and historical stuff. But how do we know what we can actually do with the property? How do we figure out if it's a good investment or not?
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Assessing the development potential. It's like putting together a puzzle, right? We're taking all the information we've gathered
Right.
and seeing how it all fits together. We're looking at zoning regulations, market demand, and of course the financials.
So we're not just looking at an empty lot anymore. We're trying to imagine what could be built there.
Exactly. But you have to balance your vision with reality, the reality of the market and the regulations. For example, you might want to build luxury apartments. But if the zoning only allows for low-density housing, you're out of luck.
Right, that would be a costly mistake. So zoning is really important.
It's essential. You need to know what's allowed, what are the height restrictions, setbacks, parking requirements. All those details matter.
But zoning isn't everything, right? We also need to think about who we're building for.
Absolutely. You need to understand the local market. Are you targeting families, young professionals, retirees? What are people looking for in this area?
So you need to find a need and fill it.
Exactly. And of course, it all has to make financial sense. Can you build it within your budget? Can you sell or rent the units for a profit?
Right, we need to make sure the numbers work.
It's about finding that sweet spot between creativity and practicality.
This is all really insightful. I'm starting to see how all these different pieces fit together.
It's a complex process, but with good due diligence, you can minimize the risks and create a development that benefits everyone.
Okay, this 26-point checklist is pretty extensive. Any advice on how to use it without getting overwhelmed?
You don't need to use every point for every project. Focus on the factors that are most relevant to your goals. Use common sense, do your research, and don't be afraid to ask for help from experts.
So create a tailored shortlist for each project.
Exactly. And remember, due diligence is an ongoing process. It's not just a one-time thing.
So we need to stay flexible and adapt as we go.
That's the key.
This has been a fantastic deep dive. I've learned so much about property development due diligence. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, I want to leave you with a question to think about. What seemingly small detail could have the biggest impact on your development project? Remember, even small things can have big consequences. So thorough due diligence is essential. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Be sure to check out the full article and all the resources we mentioned. Until next time, happy developing.
Happy developing.